Hi, I'm Tom Putnam. I'm the producer and director of a new feature film called The Dark Divide. And the film is based on the book Where Bigfoot Walks Crossing the Dark Divide and true story by our guest and renowned nature writer, Robert Michael Pyle.
Hello, I'm Robert Michael Pyle, Bob Pyle, the author of Where Bigfoot Walks and some other books, and I'm happy to be here to talk with you today.
And we're just going to be talking a little bit about the role of the caregiver and sort of how that informed your journey, not just through the Gifford Pinchot National Forest, but just I think your journey as a person. Um, for people who aren't familiar with the book or the film, could you tell us a little bit about your life with Tia and what that has to do with the story?
We're talking about a woman named Tia Linnea Pyle. That name, Tia Linnea, is explored somewhat in the movie. Linnea is the name of the twin flower, and her mother named her that because she was a plants woman, and Tia became one of the finest plants women I've ever known, a botanist and a mushroom hunter and a gardener, woman whose life was largely wrapped around plants and her family. Tia and I met in college, way back more than 50 years ago, in a mushroom class of all things. And we became mushroom buddies and pals for many years after that, through different lives, different marriages, and families. And then in the 1980s, we both became single and got back together as botany buddies, which quickly blossomed. And we fell in love, and we moved in together in 1984 and married in 85. And Tia lived with me here in an old Swedish farmhouse called Swede Park in Grays River, Washington, in the Willapa Hills for the rest of her life. And she contracted ovarian cancer in 2003-4 and died in 2013. Actually, just about right now, this possibly today, 7 years ago.
10 years I didn't actually realize that. That's such a long time to do battle with something. How were there sort of ebbs and flows and remission?
Yes, there were. First of all, I'll show you who we're talking about here. This is Tia. So yes, to survive nearly 10 years of stage 4, it was stage 4 from the get-go. That is, from the time it was discovered. She lived well for much of that time because of good treatment and because of her fitness and her good eating, running, continued to jog when she was able, and certainly walk almost all the time. At least three debilitating surgeries, and 11 complete regimes of chemotherapy over that time. 11
Oh,
regimes.
wow.
And although her response to the chemotherapy was never quite as brutal at any given time as Deborah portrays in the movie.
And we should mention Deborah Messing plays Tia in the film.
And there's some very tough scenes where she is deeply nauseous or nauseated. And Tia avoided much of that. She took the chemo better than many patients. And yet she had a great many of the accompanying difficulties, the fatigue and the pain and the nausea some, and the ebbing feelings of the emotions that go along with it, the ebbing and flowing hopes, where for a few years you think you might actually get well, and then that usually that begins to fade, and you begin looking at a sustaining situation, and eventually the doctors begin to use the term palliative, and you realize that you're just going for the best of what's left.
Is there anything that you know now that you wish you had known at the start of that process?
Other than wishing that we would have fought and got that initial ultrasound, which would have showed the tumors when they were much smaller and at an earlier stage, possibly curable at that point. That I wish we'd known. Um, because I do know women who have actually recovered from ovarian cancer. There aren't very many, but I do know some. And usually it's when discovery's been early. So I can only hope that with a improving insurance situation in the country, that women will be able to have their health checked much earlier if they suspect anything at all, any bloating or anything like that.
How did you balance those sort of different roles as an individual, a husband, a caretaker, someone who's working? How do you how do you juggle those things? They're some of the time they're naturally sort of opposed to one another in terms of your time.
Very much so, Tom. It's damned hard. One thing I really had going for me as a caregiver, aside from the fact that Tia was so brave and so strong and so positive much of the time, which made an enormous difference, both in her own survivorship, but also in our shared attitudes, uh, was the fact that I am freelance and therefore I live at home, I work at home a lot. And so I was able to be with her a great deal, almost all the time in her um, in her treatments, and certainly for her surgeries and so on. But on the other hand, my books don't make enough money, and they take a great deal of time. So a lot of the time I was here, I was in fact working, but at least I was there for her. But then I had to go out frequently to for the other tripods of my freelance existence, which are lecturing and teaching and field work, and that that was hard. Tia had to be alone for some of that, for a lot of that. We have some friends, but we live in a. Of course, we have good friends nearby, but we live in a quite a rural area, so it's a distance for people to come. Her daughter lived about 100 miles away and could come sometimes, and her son was farther. So we had no one really very close. We certainly never had home health care. It would have been difficult to find here, let alone pay for. But we worked it out. We worked. It was very difficult. I didn't get enough sleep for a few years there. There's a cute scene in the book where the two of them are bantering on the front porch, and that scene just stares me up every time because it, David and Deborah, and that front porch look so much like us. It's us. It's really us. And the way you wrote that scene, Tom, it's brilliant. As if you were there looking over our shoulder. And Tia's saying, dial down the feeling so terrible and get out of here and take your girlfriend Marcia, the butterfly net, and go catch some specimens and go chase something. Well, those are real scenes. Those kinds of things really happened. She had to kick me out into the field.
What are some of the things that you did to, I mean, Tia was somebody who had an amazing zest for life. And as you said, like her positive attitude had a bearing on the outcome. Were there things you were able to do to support her in that or lift her up?
I read to her a lot. We always read to one another. But while she was ill, I did more reading to her, a lot of massage. Of course, I increased my household contribution, expand my responsibilities around the house, far beyond what they'd ever been. So we did not eat as well, but I became a better cook. Um, but not altogether. Tia still did a lot of what she normally did. When she was well enough, and the doctors agreed, we did some travel, mostly pretty modest around the region. Lots of walking, lots of mushroom hunting, butterfly trips, and so on. Things like that would immensely raise her spirits and get her through the next coming dark times. So time with the family, especially the grandchildren, as with anyone, well or ill, was restorative and healing.
Was there anything you learned about yourself during that process as your in your role as a caregiver?
I've always been pretty selfish about my time, And that's why I've been able to write a lot of books. I'm pretty selective in things I get involved in. I'm an activist, but I pick my battles and I work hard on them, but I don't say yes to everything that comes along. And I suppose more than many people, I've been privileged. Well, I could stop right there. I have been privileged, if not economically, in many, many other ways. And when you're living with someone with an ongoing illness and you're cast in the role of caregiver, you don't get to call all the shots. I mean, I never got to call all the shots, really, of course, but I mean, I've had more volition probably in my life as an artist and a naturalist than many people get to enjoy. And I had to adjust that because this disease makes many, many demands on both the person who has the disease and on her caregivers. And those demands have to take first place. So one thing I did learn about myself is that I was more adaptable than perhaps I thought I was. I was able to enter that role with gratitude, not gratitude for the damn disease, but gratitude for the fact that between us we had the resources to live with the disease and live better than we might have otherwise. And yet it took constant adaptation and concentration on alternatives and making decisions. Oh, Tom, so many decisions that have to be made, and they're life and death decisions. Tia was very expressive in what she had to tell me, and strong-willed and precise. And if she had a strong feeling about something, I would come to know about that. One thing she told me was, when you're writing my obituary, if you say that she died after a long battle with cancer, I'm going to come back and haunt you, and not in a nice way. Because she never looked at it as a battle. Not only is it one of the worst cliches in that form of literature, that is the obituary, or the eulogy, or the encomium. You always hear this: after a long battle with cancer, long battle with cancer. She never saw it as a battle, and she told me how she wanted me to express it, and I did. And all the different obituaries I wrote for different newspapers and magazines and journals of societies she belonged to, the native plants and the weavers and everybody. I gave them each a little different Tia in the obits I wrote, because she was different people to different collections of friends and, and people she loved. So I tried to express those different parts of her. But in all of them, I expressed what other people would call a battle as her long coexistence with ovarian cancer.
Mm.
She wanted to see herself as an organism in nature living with another organism that was not welcome and it was not helpful. But she didn't want to live a life in which she felt embattled. So she never used the word fight. She never used the word battle. She used the word living with, and I'm going to live with it as well as I can. And she did.
That's a really powerful mindset to approach something like that
I
with.
think it gave her years of her life to go about it that way.
Our film focus, it takes a number of different things that happened in your life over many decades from 8 different books, and it puts them all into a very specific timeline and moment in your life. In our film, it focuses on a couple of months, which is during a time you take a journey through the Washington's Gifford Pinchot National Forest, and it's in our film. And I think from talking to you somewhat in your life, it was a big learning experience. You're obviously a much more adept outdoorsman than David Cross is in the film, but I would love to hear on the internal side and the introspective side, what did you learn about yourself during that journey, and sort of the role of nature and spending time in nature in terms of how that helped you as a caregiver, and also how that helps you now?
It's been the biggest help. aside from one another, nature has been the biggest help for both of us in our lives. There is a means of approaching that life in which one spends more attention on other species of plants and animals than just ourselves. That's what most people call nature, going out into nature, stuff besides ourselves. And we did a great deal. We were both naturalists. As I say, she was a plants woman. I was primarily a butterfly person, but we're both general naturalists as well. And the kind of balm that brings to one's life can't be overstated. Thoreau called it the tonic of the wilderness. I don't know how people who do not have a close connection to the so-called natural world, the more than human world, how they persist in a world of such stresses and adverse circumstances as we have to deal with every day. I really don't, because they can get you down. Disease can certainly get you down. And when you can, okay, so Tia would lie on the couch in the front room of our house a lot of the time when she was quite ill, and look out through our front porch down toward the Grays River, where there's a beautiful old covered bridge. The scene itself is soothing and beautiful, but there was an old dead linden tree by the river, and very often an osprey or a red-tailed hawk or a raven or a turkey vulture or some other bird of prey or a great blue heron even would land on that snag. It was Tia's bird tree, and she'd look out when she had no energy even for going walking and see that tree and take succor and entertainment and pleasure and calm from it. That's just one example, but it was the mainstay of our lives. Much of the time she was ill, she first ran, then she jogged, and then she walked miles almost every day when she wasn't really, really sick. And it was always in a rural setting with plants and animals and the airs and the waters. But her favorite of all, Tom, was when she would go chanterelling, mushroom hunting. She loved morels.
Chanterelle's a type of mushroom, right?
Type of mushroom. Golden flutes, the golden flute of the chanterelle. Here's a print that she did. Here's one of her prints. I wrote a poem for her when she first became ill. The poem was called Chinook and Chanterelle. The Chinook is the salmon and the chanterelle is the mushroom. And Tia made a print of that for that poem. There's the Chinook and there's the chanterelle.
All these years, and I never knew that was her print that was on the front of the book of poetry.
I made a number of mosaics of pictures of Tia when she first lost her hair, the day we cut her hair, when she found she was going to lose it. That's the picture that's in the movie, Tom, this one right here.
One of my favorites.
In the credits. I love that picture. I'm so glad you used it. But here's Tia with a basket of chanterelles. I know it's not very clear, but you can see that smile. And you can see how happy it made her when she came home with a basket of chanterelles, which she could do walking out from this house into the forest. We have chanterelle woods right nearby. And she'd come back, and it was as if she'd never been sick. I remember one day, just about in the middle of her illness, it was her birthday. And we were down the Oregon coast, up above a little village named Yachats. And I was looking for autumn butterflies, and she was down in the forest. And we would do that. We'd range out separately and then whistle or call and check in with each other. And so I called and said, "How you doing down there?" And her voice came back, and it said, "I'm very happy." Or "I'm very happy." It was her birthday, and she had found this big patch of chanterelles. So nothing made her happier than the chanterelles. But it was all of natural history that soothed her life and enriched her life and lengthened her life, I'm sure, and brought us together as if we needed a bond. We had, I think, a deep source of bonding, but the natural history was a big part of that. The fact that we were able to both share it, that we both felt it deeply, that meant a great deal to us. And so it became a big part of the caregiving. Make sure we both got out as often as we could.
Is there any advice or guidance you could give a caregiver who's just at the beginning of that process?
Realize that it might be a long haul. This might not be like poor babying somebody through a cold. This could be years. This could be the rest of either of your lives. So treat it as if it's still good time, not wasted time, and not lost time. Sleep and eat well. It's very easy when you're wrapped up in the worry about this to eat badly, to drink too much, and to lie in bed at night exercising or indulging in magical thinking and trying somehow to work your way out of it. That's probably not going to happen unless you're very lucky or spectacular things happen. It's probably going to be a haul. Depending on the kind of cancer, of course, you might have a better prospect of a timely conclusion of a happy kind. But with ovarian cancer in particular, it's likely to be quite a haul. And yet realizing that treatments are improving all the time. I mean, Tia died 7 years ago this week, but in those 7 years, there's been a lot of improvement in chemotherapy agents, in therapeutic agents, and all kinds of things. So this happens, it's ongoing all the time, the research and the trials. And so hopefulness is something earnestly to be cultivated, but not to conflate hopefulness with false hope or unreasonable expectations. On the other side, not to be defeatist, because to be defeatist is to curry defeat, and it's to give up on it. And if you give up on it as a caregiver, you're going to transmit that to the person who's ill, and that's not going to do any good in terms of maintaining her powers and her spirits. And I do believe very, very, very strongly that the positive attitude of the person who's ill can make an enormous difference in her prognosis. So as an advocate, okay, there's another bit of advice. Realize that you're going to have to be not only this person's caregiver, but this person's advocate, which can be just as important. You can help your wife or your lover, your partner, to make decisions that are very difficult for her to make without imposing it. The last thing a woman needs with ovarian cancer is mansplaining. But one does need from a loved one is, of course, compassion and empathy. That goes without saying, or should. But also a critical, intelligent, and energetic approach to study and research, not just the chat rooms online, but to read the scientific papers, work your way through them. Don't read just the drug companies' materials about a particular agent, but read the trials. I know I have scientific training, so I can do it more easily than some, but it just takes concentration to get the sense of it. And become an informed advocate. Most doctors actually appreciate that. Some of them resent it. But in my experience, most doctors actually appreciate an intelligent, informed approach. And be aware that these medicines are going to have their downsides. And there's going to be some, as Deborah so brilliantly acted in our film, there's going to be some times that are extremely hard to take for her, but also for you. And just man up and get ready for it, because it's going to be quite a ride. It's not going to be a ride without hope and smiles and fun and pleasures along the way, though. Not unless you're very unlucky. If you take a good approach and take care of your bodies as well as you can, you will not have an entirely lost time of this.
Thank you for being, as always, for being so generous with your time and your experiences.
Let me give you a little slideshow.
Sure.
Here's Tia in this room in an earlier incarnation. She's doing prints of Christmas cards, and myself and the cat. This is one of my favorite pictures of Tia before she was ill, with her bunny.
What was her bunny's name?
Lobelia. Lobelia the bunny.
Cool.
Here's another little collage. Long hair, no hair, cute short hair. I'd say this collage pretty much goes through our full 10 years.
I really like what you said about living with it, as opposed to battling it.
Who wants to live in a battle the whole time? It's a life, Tom. It's a life. It's got to be what you make of it, and it can be good for what's left. And with great luck, there might be a lot left. There was 10 wonderful years with Tia. Those years were good years. They were.
Thanks, Bob. For anybody who's watching this that isn't familiar with the Ovarian Cancer Research Alliance, they do some wonderful, wonderful work, both for people with ovarian cancer and for their caregivers. You can read more about them at ocrahope.org. And if you'd like to see the film or learn more about the film and Bob's work, please visit darkdividefilm.com.
And of course, we can't leave without mentioning the book that the movie is based on.
The book.
Also Counterpoint Press in Berkeley, where Bigfoot walks, crossing the dark divide. And the movie is called The Dark Divide.
And it's
Tom Putnam, director and scriptwriter and everything else.
And the reason I fell in love with that book had nothing to do with Bigfoot. It's a book that puts you out into nature, and really, for me, growing up in the Pacific Northwest, it just filled my heart with the memories and emotions and reminders of how important that is in my life. And it really just lit a fire under me to get back out, away from the computer and back outside.
I'm so glad. If there's one hope I have for my writing, it's it will help people to alleviate the darker sides of life and or understand them better, and to take more and deeper and greater pleasure and life from their own lives. But the other thing is, I want to use it as a lever to get their butts out of doors and to get people to enjoy what's around them. And therefore, once we enjoy what's around us, as David says, in a memorable scene filmed in Mother Foucault's bookstore in Portland, Oregon.
Yes.
If you love it, then you might conserve it.
Yay. That's a great note to end on.
I would like to thank everyone at OCRA and everyone who is working so hard to alleviate this dread disease and to help all the women who are living their lives with it. Thank you.